My revenue numbers were still glowing on the screen when he said it. Effective immediately, the enterprise division is being restructured. Avery's position is eliminated. Eliminated. The word hung there like smoke in the boardroom air. My name was still printed at the bottom of the slide, right there for everyone to see. Avery Whitman, SVP Enterprise Growth. Right under a bar chart showing I personally brought in 62% of total company revenue. The board members shifted in their expensive leather chairs. Nobody looked at me. They studied their phones. They examined their perfectly manicured fingernails. They stared at the mahogany table like it held secrets. Ethan, the VP I hired myself 2 years ago, cleared his throat uncomfortably. He actually slid his chair 6 inches away from mine. The scraping sound echoed in the silent room. Security was already standing by the glass door. 2 men in dark suits. Professional. Waiting. I felt it physically. Not anger. Not yet. Just this sudden drop in my stomach. Like an elevator cable snapping. Like falling in slow motion. You built something impressive, my CEO added, his voice smooth and practiced. He adjusted his expensive cufflinks, the ones his wife bought him for their anniversary. But we're moving in a different direction. Different direction. I stared at that slide, at my name still glowing there. Without me, there was no direction. And every person in that room knew it. My name is Avery Whitman. And this is the day they tried to erase me from the company I built from nothing. 5 years earlier, Northbridge Systems was 2 quarters away from bankruptcy. We didn't have an enterprise division. We barely had enough paying clients to keep the lights on and make payroll. The office was half empty. People were updating their resumes quietly at their desks. The CEO called me into his corner office one afternoon. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. His tie was loosened. His voice sounded urgent, almost desperate, like a man drowning and reaching for anything solid. "Build it from scratch," he said, leaning forward across his desk. "The enterprise division. You get full control, complete freedom, no interference. Hit 25 million in annual recurring contracts within 3 years, and we'll talk about partnership." Partnership. I can still hear that word echoing in my head 5 years later. The way he said it, the way it hung there between us like a promise carved in stone. I didn't ask for it in writing. That was my first mistake. The kind of mistake you only recognize in hindsight when it's far too late to fix. I just said yes. I believed him because I wanted to believe. Because I was hungry to prove myself in a real role with real responsibility. Because the challenge excited me more than the risk scared me. I shook his hand firmly across that polished desk. I walked out of his office already planning my first pitch, my first call, my first contract. I didn't know then that handshakes mean absolutely nothing when serious money gets involved. I didn't know that promises evaporate the second you become too valuable to keep around. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it thoroughly. The first enterprise deal took 9 brutal months to close. I flew economy to Chicago 3 separate times, squeezed into middle seats, my knees cramped against the seat in front of me. I slept in airport lounges with my laptop bag as a pillow and my coat as a blanket. I built customized financial projections myself at 2 a.m. in lonely hotel business centers, drinking terrible coffee and running numbers until they made sense. The prospect kept pushing back. Budget concerns, timing issues, internal approvals. I kept going back. I kept refining the pitch. I kept showing them exactly how our solution would save them money in year 1 and transform their operations by year 3. When the contract was finally signed on a cold Tuesday morning, our CFO actually cried. She didn't try to hide it. Tears ran down her face right there in the conference room. That single deal, that one contract, saved payroll for the entire company for 3 months. It kept us alive when we were days away from closing our doors forever. The CEO threw a company-wide celebration that afternoon. He brought in champagne and plastic cups. He raised his glass high in the middle of the office, his voice booming with confidence and relief. To leadership, he announced. He didn't say my name. He didn't mention the months of work. He didn't acknowledge the flights or the late nights or the projections. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself results would speak louder than recognition ever could. I told myself this was just the beginning of something bigger. I was right about one thing. It was absolutely the beginning, just not the way I thought it would unfold. I hired every single member of that department myself over the next 18 months. I interviewed 43 candidates to find the right 8 people. I wanted hunger, not pedigree. I wanted people who would work weekends because they believed in what we were building, not because they needed the overtime pay. I structured commission models that rewarded long-term client relationships instead of quick closes. I built retention triggers directly into every single contract we signed. Then I created something I called strategic oversight protection. It sounded corporate and professional. The legal team barely glanced at it. Enterprise accounts were contractually tied to named leadership continuity. Simple language. If executive oversight changed materially, if the designated executive was removed or reassigned, clients could request immediate contract renegotiation. I designed that clause to protect them from corporate chaos, from the kind of leadership changes that destroy client relationships and ruin projects midstream. I didn't realize at the time that it would end up protecting me. The legal team approved it without pushback. It sounded reasonable. The CEO signed off on the template because it made us look stable and professional. Clients loved it because it gave them security and leverage. I buried it in Section 14, Subsection 2, of every contract I personally wrote. 62 clients over 5 years. 62 contracts, all of them with my name explicitly listed as the designated oversight executive. I wasn't being clever or strategic. I was being thorough and protective, but thoroughness ended up saving my entire career. Ethan joined the team 2 years in. Perfect resume. Ivy League MBA. The kind of polish that makes board members nod approvingly. He'll support you operationally, the CEO explained. You focus on strategy. He handles execution. That sounded reasonable. Instead, Ethan shadowed me everywhere. He asked for access to all my client histories. He sat silently in my negotiation calls. He started presenting my strategy decks to leadership as collaborative efforts. He used the word we constantly. I noticed immediately. I also started documenting everything. Every email, every meeting, every strategy deck with my name removed and his name added. I kept a folder on my personal laptop, time-stamped, organized. I told myself I was being paranoid. I wasn't. I was watching my replacement get trained in real time, and I was gathering evidence while it happened. At a quarterly board meeting 6 months later, I was presenting our retention framework. Mid-sentence, the CEO interrupted me. Let's hear from Ethan on this, he said. Ethan stood up. He cleared his throat. Then he repeated my entire retention framework. Word for word. My framework. My research. My late nights building those models. The board members nodded enthusiastically. They asked him follow-up questions. They praised his strategic thinking. I sat there with my hands folded on the table. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. I didn't say a word. I learned something important in that moment. They weren't asking Ethan to support me. They were testing succession. They were seeing if he could replace me. And nobody was pretending otherwise anymore. That night, I went home and updated my documentation. I added notes about that meeting, about the timing, about the pattern. I knew what was coming. I sent a formal memo 3 weeks later. Subject line: Enterprise Retention Risk, Leadership Continuity Clause Exposure. I outlined the exact financial vulnerability if executive oversight changed. 62% of company revenue was contractually protected by leadership continuity language. If I left, clients could renegotiate. If I was removed, contracts could be voided. I spelled it out in clear, specific terms. The CEO replied within an hour. One sentence. Appreciate the diligence. That was it. No meeting. No follow-up. No acknowledgement of the massive risk I'd just identified. He read it. He understood it. And he ignored it. That told me everything I needed to know. He thought the clause was negotiable. He thought clients wouldn't actually use it. He thought I was exaggerating my importance. He was wrong on all 3 counts. But I didn't argue. I just saved his one-sentence reply in my evidence folder. Meetings started happening without me. Strategic planning sessions I should have been in. Client discussions I should have led. Budget reviews for my own department. I found out about major decisions after they were already announced to the team. Ethan stopped copying me on client update emails. When I asked him directly, he smiled too long before answering. You worry too much, Avery. That was his favorite line. You worry too much. Like my concerns were emotional instead of factual. Like I was being paranoid instead of observant. I stopped reacting emotionally after that. I stopped asking questions in meetings. I stopped pushing back on decisions. I stopped trying to protect my territory. Instead, I started preparing. I updated my resume. I organized my documentation. I backed up every file to 3 separate locations. And I waited, because I knew what was coming. I just needed to be ready. Back to that boardroom with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My security badge sitting on the polished table next to my half-finished coffee cup. The slide still glowing behind me, my name still visible to everyone. Security guards standing outside the glass doors, pretending not to stare directly at me while clearly waiting for their signal. I didn't argue with the CEO. I didn't ask why or demand explanations. I didn't threaten legal action or make dramatic statements about loyalty and betrayal. I just stood up slowly and deliberately. I gathered my leather notebook, the one I'd carried to every client meeting for 5 years. I picked up my favorite pen, the heavy one that felt substantial in my hand, and I said exactly one sentence. Understood. My voice was calm, almost eerily calm. Then I walked out without looking back at any of them. My heels clicked steadily on the cold marble floor all the way to the elevator. Each step echoed in the silent hallway. Security followed me at a polite distance, professional about the whole thing. They were almost apologetic in their body language. In the lobby, they handed me a cardboard box with my few personal items already packed. Someone had been in my office while I was in that meeting. Framed photo of my dog, my coffee mug with the chip on the handle, the small desk plant I'd kept alive for 3 years. I signed the exit paperwork without reading a single word of it. They thought my silence meant I was in shock. They thought it meant weakness or defeat. It meant calculation. I had been ready for this moment for 8 months, and now it was finally here. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table with my laptop and a glass of red wine. I opened my personal backup files. Every contract I'd ever written for Northbridge was saved there. I'd been meticulous about documentation from day one. I reread every single enterprise contract I'd ever written for Northbridge methodically, all 62 of them. One by one, I searched for Section 14, Subsection 2, and there it was, every single time, in every single contract. Clause 14.2, Material Leadership Change. The language was clear and unambiguous. Clients could request contract renegotiation within 60 days if the named oversight executive was removed from their position. No non-compete violation required. No client solicitation necessary. No legal gray area whatsoever. Just simple disclosure of a material change. And the company had already disclosed my departure publicly. It was public knowledge now. It was in the board minutes. It would be in the quarterly report. It was already circulating through industry channels. I closed my laptop slowly. I didn't need to contact anyone. I didn't need to make any calls or send any emails. I didn't need to do anything except Wait patiently. Gravity would handle absolutely everything else from here. Those contracts would speak for themselves with perfect clarity. I poured myself a glass of wine, and I smiled genuinely for the first time in months. They thought they were eliminating a problem position. They had just triggered a cascade that would destroy everything they'd built on top of my foundation. 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, my personal cell phone rang. Unknown number. Area code I didn't recognize immediately. I answered anyway, curious who had this number. It was the COO of our largest enterprise account, Harrison Technologies, $23 million annually, our single biggest client, the one that kept Northbridge profitable all by itself. Avery, he said. His voice was careful, measured. I heard through channels that you're no longer with Northbridge. That's correct, I replied calmly, keeping my voice neutral and professional. Long silence on his end. I could hear him breathing, thinking, calculating. Then, this changes things significantly for us. I didn't pitch. I didn't try to sell him on anything. I didn't suggest he leave Northbridge or hint that he should work with me instead. I simply said, you should review Section 14, subsection 2 of your service agreement. Another long pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind. I will, he said quietly. Thank you for the reminder. We hung up without another word. 20 minutes later, I got an email from their legal team requesting a formal contract review meeting. 2 days after that meeting, they formally triggered the renegotiation clause. Revenue loss to Northbridge, $11.8 million annually. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone to brag. I didn't post about it or gloat. I just sat at my kitchen table and waited for the phone to ring again, because I knew it would. Gravity doesn't stop with one falling object. It pulls everything down. The CEO called me 4 days after the first client opted out. His voice was tight, controlled, angry underneath. Are you interfering with our client relationships? No, I said calmly. They're exercising a contractual clause you personally approved 5 years ago. This is sabotage. This is contract law. Silence on his end. I could hear him breathing. You put those clauses in there on purpose, he said. I put them in to protect clients from instability. You created the instability. He hung up without another word. I stared at my phone for a minute. Then I opened my laptop and checked my personal email. 3 more clients had reached out, all asking about my departure, all referencing Section 14.2. The cascade was accelerating, and I still hadn't made a single outbound call. 2 more major clients triggered renegotiation within 30 days. Combined revenue loss, $18.4 million. Word spreads quietly in enterprise circles. Everyone knows everyone. Trust matters more than price. Stability matters more than features. And I had been their stability for 5 years. Now I was gone. Northbridge's investors started asking uncomfortable questions during earnings calls. The board demanded explanations. The CEO blamed market conditions. He blamed economic headwinds. He blamed everything except the truth. The truth was simple. He removed the foundation and expected the building to stand. Buildings don't work that way. I watched it all happen from my apartment. I read the quarterly reports. I monitored the stock price. I listened to earnings calls. I did absolutely nothing to accelerate it. Gravity did all the work. And gravity doesn't get tired. 6 weeks after my termination, the CEO personally invited me to lunch. Expensive Italian restaurant downtown. White tablecloths. Candles even during the day. The kind of place where a single entree costs more than most people spend on groceries for a week. He was already seated at a private table in the back corner when I arrived. Avery, he said, standing halfway up. Thank you for coming. Let's be reasonable adults about this situation. I sat down across from him and ordered sparkling water with lime. He waited until the waiter left, then he made his offer. Consultant role. 20 hours per week. 6-month contract with possible extension. Reduced authority, obviously. No direct reports. No client-facing responsibility. It's a fair compromise, he said, leaning forward slightly. It's better than nothing. Better than nothing. I let that phrase sit there on the table between us for a long moment. I watched him squirm slightly under my steady gaze. Then I smiled politely, the same professional smile I'd used in 1,000 client meetings. I built everything you're desperately trying to save right now, I said quietly. My voice was calm, but ice cold. Everything. I built it from literally nothing. From an empty spreadsheet and a dream. And you eliminated my position because I became too valuable to you. Because my success made you uncomfortable. This is just business, Avery, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Exactly, I replied. You're absolutely right. This is business. So here's my business decision. I stood up slowly, leaving my untouched water glass on the table. I decline your offer. I picked up my purse and looked at him one last time. Good luck fixing what you broke. Then I left him sitting there alone with 2 untouched menus and a bottle of expensive wine he'd already ordered. Outside on the sidewalk, breathing in the cool afternoon air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Whitman Advisory was officially incorporated exactly 2 months after my termination. Lean structure by design. No expensive office space downtown. No unnecessary administrative staff. No corporate overhead bleeding money every month. Just me and my laptop and direct enterprise consulting services. I didn't cold call a single potential client. I didn't send out mass marketing emails. I didn't need to do any of that. Clients approached me directly. Former Northbridge accounts who had already triggered their renegotiation clauses. New prospects who heard through industry contacts about what had happened. Companies that wanted my specific expertise without all the corporate dysfunction and politics. Within 6 weeks of opening my doors, I had signed 4 solid contracts. Within 3 months, I had 9 clients paying retainer fees. Every single engagement was completely legal. Every client relationship was triggered by Northbridge's own decision to remove me, not by anything I did or said. The distinction was crucial, and I was very careful about it. Non-compete agreements are legally tricky. Client solicitation can be risky business, but clients exercising their own contractual rights independently, that's just business operating exactly as designed. Exactly like the CEO himself had said to me. I worked from my apartment initially. I kept my expenses minimal and sustainable. I hired 1 part-time assistant to handle scheduling and invoicing. And I focused exclusively on doing exceptional work for the clients who trusted me. The revenue followed naturally from there. My former team members started reaching out privately. Missed deadlines. Strategic confusion. Ethan completely overwhelmed. He doesn't understand the retention models. One of them told me over coffee. He keeps trying to pitch features instead of outcomes. Another one was more direct. We're falling apart without you. I listened. I sympathized. But I didn't offer solutions. I had tried to warn them. I had documented the risk. I had sent that memo. They chose to ignore it. The CEO went on CNBC and blamed market volatility. It wasn't the market. It was the removal of infrastructure. You can't fire the foundation and expect the building to stay standing. Everyone was about to learn that lesson, and I was going to watch from a safe distance. An external audit firm contacted me 4 months after my departure. They were reviewing Northbridge's contracts for investor due diligence. They wanted clarity on the leadership continuity clauses. I provided complete documentation, including the memo I had sent, the one warning about this exact risk, dated, time-stamped, with the CEO's 1-sentence reply. Appreciate the diligence. The auditor read it twice. This was ignored, she asked. Completely, I confirmed. She closed her folder. Thank you for your time, Ms. Whitman. 2 weeks later, the audit report was delivered to Northbridge's board. I wasn't copied on it, but I heard about it anyway. Industry contacts talk, and what they said wasn't good for the CEO. Board members started distancing themselves publicly. Emergency strategy sessions were called. Cost-cutting became the new priority. The enterprise division, once the company's growth engine, was now a liability. Revenue was down 38% year-over-year. Stock price had dropped 42%. Investor calls were brutal. One analyst asked directly, "Why did you eliminate the executive responsible for 62% of revenue?" The CEO's answer was rehearsed. "We're building a sustainable leadership structure." The analyst wasn't convinced. "How's that working out?" Silence. I listened to that earnings call twice. The first time for information. The second time because I wanted to hear the panic in his voice when he couldn't answer. I'm not proud of that, but I'm not sorry either. 6 months after my termination, I received an invitation to keynote the annual Enterprise Sales Summit. The topic they requested: retention architecture in enterprise sales. The irony wasn't lost on me. The ballroom at the downtown convention center was absolutely packed. Over 800 people. Standing room only in the back. Every major player in the industry was there. Northbridge was listed as a mid-tier sponsor. Their company booth was tucked in the back corner of the expo hall, looking small and slightly desperate. I delivered my presentation about building client relationships that last, about the importance of leadership continuity, about how trust isn't built through features and pricing, but through consistent, reliable human connection over time. I saw Ethan sitting in the audience, about halfway back during my talk. He avoided direct eye contact the entire time, especially when I mentioned leadership continuity clauses and the importance of naming specific executives in enterprise agreements. He left before the question and answer session even started. Afterward, while I was signing books at the author table, 3 of Northbridge's remaining major clients approached me separately. They didn't ask about my consulting availability. They didn't pitch me on working together. They just wanted to shake my hand and tell me they'd learned a lot from my presentation. But I knew exactly what they were really saying. I knew what those handshakes meant. And for the first time since my termination, I saw something new in Ethan's eyes when he glanced back from the exit. Not frustration. Not annoyance or anger. Real fear. The kind of fear that comes from knowing you're drowning in deep water and nobody is coming to save you. The next quarterly earnings report was devastating. Revenue down 38%. Operating margin negative for the first time in 7 years. Stock plummeted another 26% in after-hours trading. Analysts used words like strategic mismanagement and leadership crisis. Nobody mentioned my name in the reports. They didn't need to. Everyone in the industry knew exactly what had happened. You don't lose 38% of revenue by accident. You lose it by firing the person who built it. I read the report twice. Then I closed my laptop and went for a walk. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, and I felt nothing but calm. Ethan resigned 2 weeks later. Official statement: pursuing other opportunities. Unofficial truth: completely overwhelmed. He sent me a short email. I underestimated what you built. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Sorry doesn't rebuild revenue. Sorry doesn't restore trust. Sorry is just a word people say when consequences arrive. The CEO stood alone now. No VP to blame. No market conditions to hide behind. Just him and the crater he'd created. Board meetings became more frequent. Emergency sessions. Closed-door conversations. I watched from the outside, and I waited for what I knew was coming. Emergency board. Vote. Scheduled. Leadership confidence crisis. I heard about it through industry contacts before the press release went public. 18 months after he eliminated my position, the CEO was about to lose his own. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had removed me because I was too important, because my success made him nervous, because he thought Ethan could replace me for half the cost. Now the board was removing him for exactly the same reason, because he had become a liability, because his decisions had destroyed value, because someone else could do better. Karma doesn't always work, but when it does, it's precise. Press release issued at 4:37 p.m. on a Friday. CEO stepping down effective immediately. Interim leadership appointed. Market stabilization language throughout. He lost everything because he believed he was the company. He wasn't. He never was. I read the press release 3 times. Then I deleted it and went back to work. I had client calls to prepare for. I had proposals to write. His downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was what I was building without him. 1 year after my termination, Whitman Advisory surpassed Northbridge's former enterprise revenue. 43 clients, 97% retention rate, 0 restructuring, 0 layoffs, 0 emergency board meetings. I didn't rebuild out of revenge. I rebuilt out of clarity. The difference matters. Revenge is emotional. It's reactive. It burns hot and fades fast. Clarity is strategic. It's intentional. It builds something that lasts. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was trying to prove something to myself. That I didn't need his company. That I didn't need his approval. That everything I built at Northbridge wasn't luck. It was skill. And skill is portable. I saw him one final time about 18 months after everything fell apart. Airport lounge at O'Hare. We were both waiting for delayed flights to different cities, different lives, different worlds entirely now. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but diminished in some fundamental way, not financially ruined, not completely destroyed, just exposed, stripped of the armor that power and position had given him for so many years. He saw me from across the lounge. He hesitated for a long moment, clearly debating whether to approach. Then he walked over slowly and stood there awkwardly next to the chair across from mine. "You were holding it all together," he said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "The whole time. It was you." I looked up at him calmly. "No," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "I wasn't holding it together. I was the structure itself. I was the foundation, and you chose to remove me." He nodded slowly, processing that. "I made a mistake," he admitted. "You made several," I corrected him. Silence stretched between us, uncomfortable, heavy with everything unsaid. "For what it's worth," he said finally, "I'm genuinely sorry. I should have valued what you built." I picked up my briefcase and my boarding pass. "Worth is determined by outcomes," I said, standing to face him directly. "Your apology doesn't change anything that happened. It doesn't rebuild what you destroyed. It doesn't restore the trust you broke." I walked toward my gate without looking back. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel satisfaction or vindication. I just felt done. Here's what I learned through all of this, through every painful moment and every quiet victory. When someone erases your name from a slide, you need to make absolutely certain you were the foundation of the building they're standing in. Because foundations don't scream when they're removed from a structure. They don't argue or make threats or demand recognition. They just let gravity speak for them. And gravity never takes sides. It doesn't care about politics or personalities. It just reveals truth with absolute precision. They thought they were eliminating a redundant position to cut costs and consolidate power. They were actually dismantling critical infrastructure. They thought Ethan could replace me with his Ivy League degree and his polished presentations. He couldn't replace what I had built over 5 years. The relationships, the trust, the deep understanding of what each client actually needed. Nobody could replace that. Not because I'm irreplaceable as a person or because I'm somehow special, but because I had built something so deeply integrated into the company's revenue structure that removing me meant removing the entire system itself. That was never arrogance on my part. That was simply architecture. Careful, intentional, strategic architecture. I designed those continuity clauses to protect clients from corporate chaos and broken promises. But I also designed them, whether consciously or not, to protect the value I was creating every single day. Not through ego or spite, through structure and foresight. The CEO learned an expensive lesson that cost him everything. You can't separate the builder from the building while the construction is still actively happening. You can't fire the foundation and somehow expect all the upper floors to stay perfectly level. And you absolutely cannot ignore a detailed warning memo and then act shocked when everything it predicted comes true exactly as described. I don't hate him anymore. I don't think about him much at all these days, honestly. I'm too busy building something better, something more stable, something that has my name on every slide and every contract. Not because I desperately need the recognition, but because I earned it through years of hard work and smart decisions. And this time, nobody can take it away from me, because this time I own the foundation.